Came across this story and thought, well, you're going to have to definitely look into this. It's a movement called FIRE, okay? And it's an acronym that stands basically for Financial Independence Retire Early. Pretty cool acronym. It's what our guest decided to do. It's what apparently a lot of others are deciding to do as well. So if you thought, you know what, yeah, I'm not looking forward to retiring at you gave up on freedom 55 or 65. Well, now it can be freedom 45, in some cases even younger for some people. Our next guest is one of them. Jordan Grumet is an author and the doctor from Evanston, Illinois. He's on the line. Jordan, thanks for being here this afternoon. I want to start with your personal story. So you, in fact, were working as a primary care doctor, and this is back in 2014. And then what happened? Did the light go off and you decide you didn't want to do that anymore?
Well, what I realized is that after working as a doctor for multiple years, I was getting burned out, and I was no longer enjoying work. I was no longer enjoying what I was doing, and I, like many people who are in the middle of their work week or year, looked around and said, I can't do this for the rest of my life. And so I knew I had to find a way out.
How long had you been doing it for?
Well, I was lucky because I was born to parents who had really good financial modeling. They taught me about money, so I didn't know why I was doing it, but my parents put money in the stock market, so I put money in the stock market. My parents had invested in real estate, so I invested in real estate. So they gave me all these wonderful tools, but I didn't know how to take all of that know-how they had given me and then build a financial life such that my investments could support me.
Okay, so I get that. Obviously, most people or some people won't have the advantages that you did, but that's really not sort of the case here in terms of why this story sort of came to me. It came to me because at one point you decided, okay, yeah, I have a couple of bucks in the bank, but this idea of you not wanting to work at that job anymore because you weren't enjoying it or you felt burned out, that's not enough for you to have sat back and lived out the rest of your life just on what you had, right?
Right. I had to then make some real choices on how I wanted to live and what I wanted to do in order to be able to escape this 9 to 5. And there are a few levers we have, right? One of those levers is frugality. We can decide how much to spend. And by deciding to spend less, we actually find that the amount we need every year is less to live on. That's one part of it. Then the other side is investing and making money. How do we make our wealth grow exponentially? And I found that if you invest wisely and you do some extras, what we call side hustles, you can actually build your wealth quickly, and it can help you remove yourself from the hustle and bustle of the 9 to 5.
Okay, how did you find this whole FIRE situation, right? Because this is something you actually went and discovered online, that people were doing this, and this was an actual movement?
So it came to me by accident. I was writing a blog about medicine back in 2014, and I had a relatively successful blog, and a gentleman wrote me, and he had written a medical book about finances. It was called The White Coat Investor. The guy was Jim Dolly, and he asked me to review his book for my medical blog. Well, he sent it to me. I read it beginning to end within a few hours. And it hit me, this is what I'd been looking for. You see, I knew I was burned out, and I'd gone to my accountant, I'd gone to my financial advisor, asking them, well, how much do I need, and how do I extract myself from work? And the truth is, neither of them could really tell me how to do that.
Okay, so they couldn't tell you how to do. What did this movement suggest? Like, where did you start?
Well, the starting point is actually easy. The question is, how much money do I need in order not to work? And there's actually been lots of studies that look into this. There's something called the Trinity study, and a guy named William Bangan who did a bunch of studies about what's called the safe withdrawal rate. Basically, it asks the question, if I have a certain amount of money and I never want to work again, and I have that money generally well invested in, let's say, 50% equities or stocks and 50% bonds, how much can I withdraw every year and still not end up with zero? And so what they did is they did these studies to look at 30 years, and they found something called the 4% rule, or the 4% safe withdrawal rate. I'm going to turn that and flip that around a little bit and just say if you look at your spending every month and multiply, I should say if you look at your spending every year and multiply that by 25, that's pretty much how much money you need to survive for 30 years without making any more money, right? So if you spend $40,000 a year, multiply that by 25, and you need $1 million invested for that $1 million to support you, for you to make money on your money for the next 30 years. So one of the biggest things I learned from reading this book is there is a calculation. There's math behind this. And I can look at that math and then decide how much money I really need to save towards.
So you can hear people now, as you describe this, thinking to themselves, listening to this interview, thinking to themselves, well, that's great to have the $1,000,000 that you can afford to invest. Obviously, most people don't have that kind of money. Can you make this work on less?
Well, it all depends on your spending, right? So the wonderful thing about the FIRE, Financial Independence Retire Early community, is you have some people who spend a lot of money, and they're called Fat FIRE, right? These are the people who make a lot of money, saved a lot of money, invested wisely, did it for many, many, many years, and then they're living off of that and they're spending a lot more. But then you also have what's called lean FIRE, this idea that there are people who are willing to be pretty frugal and use some life hacks in order not to spend as much. And so I know people living on $20,000 or $30,000 a year. In fact, the guy who started this, his name was Jacob Lund Fisker, one of the people who was the original FIRE advocates, was living in Chicago, Illinois, and he was living off of about $5,000 or $6,000 a year. Now that is extreme, and his brand was called Early Retirement Extreme. But what we found actually is that there are people in all parts of the spectrum. So the FIRE movement started really as high income earners, but there are a lot of low income earners, a lot of people who never made more than $50,000 or $60,000 a year, who are finding a way to become financially independent, and they're doing it by living on less and by investing wisely at what they save. And I think when you do both of those together, it becomes super powerful. And most people don't realize, if you invest wisely, I'm in the United States, so I look at the United States stock market. If you invest in broad-based index investments, your money is going to double every 7 to 10 years. So even if you start with very little, we're talking about exponential growth, compounding interest. So what happens is your money can grow faster than you think. And by just spending a little less or just by making a little more, what we find is that people generally get to their FIRE number much faster than they think they will. So when they look at the calculations, they calculate out they're 35 now, it's going to take them 20 years to get there. A lot of these people get there in 10 years or sometimes even 5, A, because the stock market has been doing very wonderfully over the last decade, B, because they've been learning to side hustle a little bit, and C, because they're spending just a little bit less too. And when you do all those things together, it becomes magical and exponential.
What's the thing you stopped spending money on?
You know, for every person that can be different, right? So for some people, if you think about the 3 big things that we spend money on that really mess up our budget, it's generally food, where we live, and transportation. So when we're talking to people about doing this, you know, can you walk more and drive less? Automatically, you're going to save money on gas. Can you buy a used car instead of a new car? Can you go down from being a 2-car family to a 1-car family? When it comes to food, can you eat out less? You know, maybe you want to go ahead and cook more at home. Maybe instead of eating out 5 times a week, you want to eat out 3 times a week. Maybe you love eating out, but instead of going to the most expensive restaurant, you want to choose a restaurant that's more affordable. And then there's cost of living. Where do you live? Maybe you live closer to your job, move to an area that costs a little bit less, and then you're also walking to work instead of driving. So now you've decreased the cost of living based on where you live, but you've also decreased the cost of transportation. So there are a million different ways to toggle these different levers. The question is about being really thoughtful about it and really questioning how important it is to you. Because one thing we're really also learning in the FIRE community, you know, it's not worth giving up all these things you love to then be miserable but not working. It's really a mix of giving up the things you don't love and becoming what we call a valuist. You want to be a person who spends, but spends on what you value, and make sure you save on those things that weren't adding to your life. And so that's kind of the way we look at it.
I'm out of time. This is fascinating. For people who had not heard of the FIRE movement, where do you find info on this? Like, where could they go online?
Oh, there are so many different wonderful places to learn about this. One of the greatest ways, there's a book by J.L. Collins called The Simple Path to Wealth. I think it is one of the greatest ways to learn about this movement. It teaches you all about money, investing, etc.
I thank you so much for the time, Jordan. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me on.
Jordan Grumet. So the FIRE movement, Financial Independence Retire Early. Check it out.